And a happy Tuesday, NCAA basketball fans. The madness has begun. It's finally here. The bracket is out. The madness is going to take hold for the rest of the month and into April. This is your weekly Trogcast, two really old guys talking NCAA basketball. This is old guy number one, Jeff Zink, and joining me on the other end is old guy number two, Jim Reaker. Jim, relatively, how you doing?
Pretty good. It's Christmas time in college basketball. This is what we wait for, the madness. And, of course, it started last week with the conference tournaments, which is almost, for me, I think, sometimes is as exciting as the NCAA tournament. But, of course, this tournament has taken a life of its own. It captures this country. It's almost like they probably should just make it a holiday, at least this Thursday and Friday, because not much work gets done a lot of places, I think.
Now, you say Christmas, but it's also right around the time of Easter, and a lot of places can rise from the dead. And as you pointed out many times, it really in some ways did begin last week with those conference tournaments, because some conferences, in fact a lot of conferences, were only going to get one team into the dance. And with the new quadrant system that they're using, it made it less likely that some of those lesser conferences would get into. So we'll talk about the 68 here in a little bit, but let's look back at the conference tournaments just a little bit. We don't want to go bit by bit because we already know who's in, and the games start tonight, and we want to be able to get to that. But for you, who was the biggest surprise coming out of the conference tournaments last week?
Well, just kind of going away from the major conferences, I think the biggest surprise, although I did look back, they had already defeated them once, but Marshall's win over Middle Tennessee State, which kept them out of the tournament completely. I think that's Conference USA. That was probably the biggest. In the major conferences, this may surprise you, but I was really surprised, and we're going back some ancient history here as far as tournaments go, because this one was played almost 2 weeks ago, is Michigan winning the Big Ten with wins over Nebraska, Michigan State, and Purdue. I just don't think anybody saw that coming. Most people were pointing to Michigan State or Purdue to win that, and or even maybe Ohio State. But Michigan, who finished fourth, that I thought was a surprise. And here's another one that you probably wouldn't say it's a surprise because it was like the third or fourth in a row, but I just didn't see this coming. The UK winning the SEC with wins over Georgia, Alabama, and Tennessee. And I guess I just didn't think that was going to happen just because the Wildcats have been so inconsistent this year. But to play three really good games in a row to win that one, that was kind of a surprise to me. And, maybe the Wildcats are finding their own here, those young kids, as they go toward March.
Well, I mean, just on that note, because that's one of the things I watch, the SEC has been up and down all year. Just about anybody could have won that. I think that's it's good for Kentucky going in. I had Marshall in there too, coming out of Conference USA. They, they not only took out Middle Tennessee State, who's not going to make the dance, even though they were in the top 25. It's almost until the end of the season, but also knocked out the Western Kentucky Hilltoppers, who looked to be on the verge of getting themselves in with a 24-10 record. And, of course, they're the only team that's going to go from the Conference USA. Even Old Dominion in there had a better record in the league and overall than Marshall. I'm with you. In those big conferences, though, anybody can be the surprise. I think the surprise for me, it won't be for you, I know, because you follow them so closely, was Providence. They've played well up and down, but, to almost take the Big East tournament, and like I say, to go ahead and get the joke out of the way, but they sort of lost it by the seat of Ed Cooley's pants. To be down 14 to Xavier and to come clawing back, it's not a good look for the Muskies to let that happen, but I think they very much knew they might have been playing for their tournament life and played their way in. And another team I got to give a shout out to is the University of Maryland Baltimore County Retrievers. Now they finished second, and it's too bad that a team like Vermont, who won its conference by 3, is not going to be in. But that's why you play the tournaments, and the Retrievers were second. But this is the team that was just 7-25 in 2016. So they've made a fantastic turnaround under Ryan Odom, who's only been there 2 years. So those are sort of my surprises. But nothing really big. That people were shocked there was nobody that I saw having 8th, 9th seed come storming in. A lot of people mentioned Davidson, but that wasn't a surprise to me at all. They're just a good team that knows how to get on a run.
Yeah, and you look at the Pac-12, Arizona kind of expected, the ACC, Virginia kind of expected, and again, UK winning the SEC, and Kansas in the Big 12. They were the favorites, and so there wasn't a lot of big surprises there. And I agree with you on Providence. In fact, Providence had a chance to win that tournament. They had tie score in regulation, and they had the ball. And if you'd watched Kyron Cartwright play the last 2 days, you had to feel that he was going to find a way to get it in the basket. But the Villanova Wildcats were able to stop him, put it into overtime, and were able to pull out their a championship in the Big East tournament.
And who knows, maybe towel tucked into the back of your pants is going to be the new look for the Providence Flyers and Coach Cooley. But on the other side, it's who sort of played themselves out of the tournament. I mean, the ones that you thought might have been in that didn't have a good tournament run, in your view, last week.
Well, I don't know if they would have been in, but there was a lot of talk about Notre Dame, and I think that it was very questionable with Bonzie Colson being out for so long, and I'm having a fairly decent record, but I think they were maybe one game away. If they'd have won one more game in the ACC tournament, I believe that was maybe Duke that beat them. If they'd have won that game, I think maybe they would have got in, and some people still thought they were going to be in. But of course, they didn't make it, and they are in the NIT, and just a disappointing season, really, for the Irish. Mike Bray's done a really good job there, especially since they've gone to the ACC, where they've been near the top and been in the tournament. So, but you never know how things are going to shake out with injuries as you go through the long college basketball season. So that's the one team that I thought could have helped themselves a little bit more. Other than that, I don't know if there was anybody that really played themselves out, really, that was sitting in or people thought they were in and didn't play well and didn't get in. I don't know if you have any feelings of any other teams that was in.
Well, just a couple away from the Big Six. I mean, because those guys, and we'll talk about this, so many teams in the Big Six get in that you can't really feel bad for a team in the Big Six that doesn't. Mine, I look sort of more at the mid-majors or those lesser categories. So, I'm looking at a team like St. Mary's, who was in the top 25 most of the year, but the West Coast Conference really wasn't all that good again, and losing to BYU in a semifinal. And people have always talked about their weak schedule. First of all, my view on that is if everybody's so worried about their weak schedule, why do they keep ranking them in the top 25? Maybe they shouldn't be there at all. But that gave them an excuse to keep them out, even though they beat Gonzaga. Of course, Gonzaga won it all, so there was no question there, which might be their last season in the WCC. There's talk of them moving to the Mountain West. And the other team we've already mentioned, that was Middle Tennessee State. I mean, they did such a good job to put themselves in position, and they were in the top 25 and had all the analytics. And I was kind of surprised that they didn't get in, but they did lose in the semifinals as well. But just a few. I mean, it's getting harder and harder for the non-Big Six or the non-Big 6.5 if you count the AC in there to get in. But they're still the NIT. They're still the CBI. There's other postseason tournaments for them to participate in. Okay. So that gets us to the 68, and the action does start tonight with the Long Island University of Brooklyn Blackbirds taking on the Radford Highlanders. That game has just tipped off, and then that'll be followed by the St. Bonaventure Bonnies and the UCLA Bruins in two of those play-in games. And then tomorrow, of course, will be North Carolina Central Eagles versus the Texas Southern Tigers. And the Arizona State Sun Devils and the Syracuse Orange. I mean, you eating dinner over there, Jim? Or
no?
You got one of those days where you got the dentist office sounds going there.
I'm sorry, I am in a prone position here, a little more comfortable in my recliner today.
Oh, so your speaker is swiping against your chest. And Jim's a little bit under the weather there, but he's here mentally, and that's it. So let's first review our numbers. We were both pretty close. I mean, you had 7 going in the Big East. They actually picked 6. Your outlier Marquette didn't make it. In the Big 10, you said 4, and there were 4. And in the Big 12, you said 8, and you had 7. Of course, you didn't really make any names. You just thought 7 or 8 would come out of it. So you were off by 2. And for me, the ACC, I said 9. They took 9. The Pac, I said 4. They took 3. The one that I mentioned that didn't go was USC. And then the SEC, I said 8, and 8 right on. So you're only off by 2. I was only off by 1. So I'll collect my favorite cold beverage later. But still, that's pretty close. That's pretty good guessing by the both of us to get them in there. So that leads us to this, and we look at it, who got screwed? Who should probably be in there that's not, to the lay fan, that the committee decided to put in there?
Well, I think there's a few teams that really has some beef, and I think I'd probably start with number 1 would probably be USC. You finished second in your conference, 12-6, I believe they were in the conference.
Yep.
And a team from their conference who finished 8 at 8-10 in the conference went over them. That's the one that I understand where I think it comes from is basically the quadrant system that you talked about. Mm-hmm. But I went back and looked through Arizona State's schedule, and they did have 2 big wins all year. They beat Xavier in a neutral site, and they beat Kansas at Kansas early, and winning at Kansas. Although here's the thing I'd have to say about that is Kansas lost some other games at home this year. This wasn't a normal home schedule where they usually dominated home. So I think they maybe beat Wichita State, but Wichita State really didn't beat, wasn't quite the team. I think they were top 5. So other than that, those 2 or 3 wins catapulted them, past the USC Trojans, who, and I looked through their schedule, they didn't have maybe any marquee wins, but still to finish second in your conference, and I believe they went to the final game, didn't they?
And they were second in the tournament as well. Yeah,
that just didn't make sense. Although I heard something today, and this I went, a conspiracy theory. Who is under investigation by the NCAA? USC and Oklahoma State. And both of those, in Oklahoma State, I think, was another one that had a legitimate beef. They had beaten Kansas, and I think they won at West Virginia. Had a very good run in the Big 12 season. I think those 2 schools. And again, I'm not going to start that discussion, but it's an interesting thought that does the NCAA say, hey, when they had a chance, all those teams on the bubble, like, okay, these are the ones we're going to take. But in Syracuse, I just looked at and it seems like they're always on the bubble and they always get in. It's almost like Jim Boeheim has, I don't know, something going with the NCAA.
Pictures from the office party or something. Yeah.
Something, because I looked there, they actually finished, I don't think they had a winning record in the ACC, and I think their biggest win was Clemson, maybe late in the season. Didn't really do much in the ACC tournament, so didn't quite understand that. But I guess the quadrant system, the big wins, and maybe that'll cause some teams to schedule even tougher schools outside their conference in that non-conference schedule. It's kind of like hit the moving target because, they tell teams this is why you didn't get in. And the next season they try to rectify that. But a major change this year, although they were very transparent about it, this is the way we're going to rate teams with the 4 quadrants.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I very much agree with you with USC. I'm sure the investigation had something to do with it, but there's a lot of schools under investigation. They might not have been bubble teams to get there. I think my comment would just be the non-Big Six, like I've already mentioned. My first call would be, nobody got screwed. You want to get in, play better. Win more games, win your tournament. Like you
go
said,
undefeated.
Yeah, you're not going to do that, just more. USC was 0-3 against teams in the polls, whereas actually, I don't necessarily look at it as they took this team out of the conference and not that team. I was pretty sure they're going to put ASU in because of the surge that Bobby Hurley had them on. But it could have something to do with it. But what's surprising with the new quadrant system, you look at, there just aren't any conferences getting multiple bids. 37 of the 68 spots went to Big Six schools. That's 54%. You add the AAC who got 3, and it's up to about 59%. AAC you get 3, and you're glad to have a Houston in there who lost their conference final to Cincinnati by 1. I'm talking about schools with the big ones that got in. Of course, Nevada, Rhode Island, top ranked for most of the year, but they lost to Davidson. So they look at their record, unlike Middle Tennessee State. St. Bonaventure got a late run, and they came over the top. And Wichita State, of course, lost in their semis to a hot Houston. So these were the top teams in those bigger conferences, especially the ACC or the A10. But you're just not seeing any other conferences get multiple picks because they are taking so many from the marquee leagues throughout the NCAA. So that's who I think this new quadrant system or whatever it is. Basically, the rich get richer, and everybody else is playing just to hope they can get in sometime and be a Cinderella.
Yeah, and one other, I did have one other team, and that is Oklahoma. If you look at them down the stretch, and I watched a lot of their games just following Big 12 down the end of the stretch, and they were not playing well at all. And I think they lost maybe 12 out of the last 16 games. And I know, and I almost consider maybe they want Trae Young in the tournament because, he is the best player, at least has the best stats in America as a freshman this year. And I think that maybe that personality factor maybe got them in over some other teams that maybe deserved it more. But, again, it happens every year, right? Somebody feels slighted.
Well, that leads us right into the conversation about and that would be my top team of who's least deserving is Oklahoma. We had this conversation a few weeks ago about would they put him in even though they weren't playing well. They lost 12 of their last 15 or 16, I think it was, 8 of their last 10, did make a big splash in the Big 12 tournament. But they want people to be able to see Trae Young. I have no doubt that's what it was. I felt the same way that you did about Syracuse, under 500 in their conference. You look at what they did in terms of the ACC. They were 8-10. I mean, Boston College is 7-11, and they ended the year 19-15, where Syracuse was only 20-13, and Boston College actually was 2-4 against poll-rated teams, whereas Syracuse was only 1-7. Of course, that means they played more of those teams. So, especially like you're saying over USC, and the other team that I'd have to say is undeserving, and I don't know how we fix this if every conference gets a bid, but it would be a team like Texas Southern. They win the SWAC tournament, but they were 15-19 on the year, and 12 wins in that conference out of their 15 wins. Of course, at the conference where only one team, and that was Grambling, even had a winning record at 17-14. And I don't know the correction for that because basically the whole conference stunk and nobody really deserved to be in it, but they saved a spot for them. So that's sort of my thoughts on the least deserving.
Yeah, and back to that Oklahoma State, I remember us talking last week. They played each other in the tournament, and we almost said maybe that's a play-in game because they both, and Oklahoma State won that game, and Oklahoma got the bid. So I guess it wasn't a play-in game. So again, there's always going to be people who are unhappy, but we move forward, right? It's time to play the games, and we got that other tournament, the NIT, which and I know that's only a consolation prize, but the good thing about the NIT, what they've done, I think, is for those teams that are on the brink that don't make it and they get NIT bids, that the first 3 rounds are usually played at home sites, so it gives the fans sometimes one last game or two to watch in their favorite team in their home arena. So if that's any consolation at all.
Yeah, and sometimes it is a great way to build up. The Michigan team that you talked about earlier, they had a great NIT run, I believe, a couple of years ago, and I believe it was 2011, 2012, something like that. So you can build that winning philosophy by going to the NIT or another one and just finding ways to win. So, of course, the other controversy with it always is, the seeds. And you got to look at, everybody's always talking about the top seeds, the top 2 seeds. So we can sort of combine these next 2 topics. Did they pick the correct ones? And who's sort of, by the way the NCAA set it up, the one the least likely to make it to San Antonio by the bracket?
Of the number 1 seeds?
Yeah.
Well, if you listen to the national media, they're all pretty agreed that it's Xavier that will not make it to the Final Four. I have trouble backing up that theory, but I'm a little biased, so
well, yes, you are. And I'm sure that when we get to our picks here in a little bit, that might shine through.
But if you look at the other 2, I mean, Virginia is, I think, by far the favorite, just the way they play and the season they've had. You got to say that there's a good chance they'll get there. Villanova, of course. Well, Xavier can't hold much against Villanova as they've beaten them twice handily and won the Big East tournament. And Kansas, who came on at the end, and we talked about Kansas maybe playing some of their best basketball the last 2 weeks of the season. Bill Self really getting things together when everybody thought this would be the end of the streak, and they continued with their 14th straight Big 12 championship. So the other 3, I think I would agree. If you got to pick one, it would probably be, Xavier's the obvious choice. Never been there, and have sometimes not played maybe up to the par that they need to, especially against lower-ranked teams that kind of play to their competition sometimes. And, of course, in the NCAA tournament, that can get you in trouble because if you have that bad day, there's no do-overs.
Nope. No home and homes in the NCAA. Yeah. I think that the committee definitely sent Xavier a message. I mean, they are going to let them play the first weekend in Nashville, which is only about 5 hours here from Cincinnati. So the fans we talked about, maybe they might be in the East bracket or Midwest bracket, and end up in Pittsburgh or something like that, which is still only about 5 hours. But it's the second weekend that you have to look at. Being in the West, they have to go and play in Los Angeles, different time zone, different setting. And the people that they're most likely going to have to march through to get to the Final Four are going to be teams like, Gonzaga or, North Carolina or possibly Michigan. I think they've got the hardest row to hoe. But I think they also sort of sent a message to Kansas. They congratulate them by letting them basically play at home the first weekend because they're in Wichita, and then they go to Omaha, so it's not that far afield, but they put Duke and Michigan State in that bracket. So some people were already saying that, Kansas might not even be the best team in their bracket at this point. Like you've said, Michigan State hasn't played well on the road, so that's going to be tough. Villanova gets to stay on the East Coast, and their second weekend might be the easiest because they might have to trundle through Wichita State, Purdue, and West Virginia. Those are teams that have all been up and down. Purdue earlier in the year might have been tougher, but lately they haven't quite been the team that you want to. Virginia week 2 they get to go down to Atlanta, where they're going to look at Kentucky, Arizona, Tennessee, and Cincinnati as their possible slog to get through. And you just don't know. Those teams haven't really impressed anybody overall. Cincinnati probably the biggest of those, but not playing much out of the ACC. You just don't know what's going to happen to them. And sadly, of course, Virginia just announced that DeAndre Hunter, their big six-man, who won the six-man of the NCAA, it will not be back for the tournament with that hand injury. So that'll make it a little tougher. But I have to go with what you're saying, too. I think Xavier, because not only going out to L.A., but they just haven't been there. But, of course, that also puts the pressure on Virginia. They've been there, but they haven't been there for over 30 years, and they certainly haven't been there under Tony Bennett. So you have two coaches in the seats of Bill Self and Jay Wright who've won it fairly recently. And then you got two coaches looking for their first Final Four. So it's going to be interesting, as it always is.
Well, and one fact, I just thought of this, and I researched it, and we'll probably talk about it tomorrow. I believe of the Xavier's 3 Elite Eights, 2 of them came in the Western Regionals. Last year, when they went to the Elite Eight, I think that was in Phoenix. And in 2008, when they went to the Elite Eight and lost to UCLA, I believe that game was in Los Angeles. So they've had some of their best success in the West Regional. So I don't think that'll affect them too much. They're a team that has traveled a lot this year. Remember, they went out to Vegas for the tournament, and they've gone many places. And so I think they'll be fine there. It would have been nice for the Xavier fans maybe to have Omaha. They could have possibly driven there, but Xavier's going to have their strong contingent wherever they go, whether they have to drive or fly.
You're right. You're right on that. So let's look at it. It happens every year. We have a Cinderella. We have a 12 beat a 5. Something happens. Who's going to be the biggest surprise in the Sweet 16 next week?
Well, I'm going to go with a team that you talked a little bit about, Providence. I think Providence is playing very, very well, and they have a first-round game against Texas A&M, who's had some issues lately. And then the next game to get to the Sweet 16 would be a big upset, I think, in most people's mind, and that would be over the North Carolina Tar Heels. But I've watched them a lot, and they've had, 10 losses this year. I think they're very inconsistent. And, again, watching that Providence team last week in the Big East tournament, they seem to be coming together, some new younger players stepping up and playing some big roles. And, again, thank God he's gone. Kyron Cartwright is just one amazing player. He can just – when he gets hot, he's almost impossible to stop. He hits shots over his shoulder and things that are just unbelievable. So just the way they've been playing, again, they almost beat Villanova. I think they're hot right now. And so that's going to be my pick of the surprise team to make it to the Sweet 16.
Well, my pick is basically, I don't think there's going to be a Cinderella this year. I think we've talked about this several times where, the top 30 teams or top 25 teams, any one of them could probably win this. And even though that does get you into the second layer of seeds, when you see things like, UCLA or St. Bonaventure is going to be an 11th seed, but they could certainly get hot and get on a run, or Arizona State. But I do have a few teams that I think are going to be fun to watch, and you might see them pop through. One, I think, is Davidson. They've been on a tear, and with the inconsistency of Kentucky, that might be the top possibility for a 12 to beat a 5, which seems to happen every year. The others, when you look at it, it's Murray State against West Virginia and New Mexico State versus Clemson and San Diego State versus OSU. I just don't see those as likely. Houston, who got hot late in the year and had a great AAC tournament, took Cincinnati down in the last minute and beat Wichita State as well. I don't know that the run can go, and they don't have much out of the ACC, but they were fun to watch. Choice number 3, and it all depends on what they bring to it, would be Texas. They play in a very tough league. They should be able to take Nevada in the first round. In fact, I've got that pick down in Nashville, and then they would play Cincinnati. And the Bearcats seem to be everybody's sort of weakest number 2 seed. So they could be in there. And I think the fun team to watch that's probably the least on everybody's radar would be the Loyola Chicago Ramblers. This is just a fun team to watch if you haven't got a chance to see them. They've been lurking right on the edge of the top 25 all year, even though they didn't pop into it. And they do have the history. It's old. Loyola Chicago has won an NCAA game, but it's they could easily probably take Miami if they have a good game, and then they're going to play Tennessee or Wright State. And Tennessee, even though they had a strong finish in the rank number 3, they could be one of those teams that's open for the possibility. And the other thing we just talked about is you just don't know if this is it for Trae Young at Oklahoma and or Michael Porter at Missouri. Are they going to want to really put their team on their back and make a charge with them, or is it going to be an early out for both of them? So those are just some teams on the radar. If I had to pick one to come through, I would say maybe it very well could be Illinois Chicago there, the Ramblers.
Yeah, Loyola, I believe they were one of the founding members of the MCC with Xavier. And then I think you go even back farther, they were a national power back in the 60s, kind of around when the Cincinnati Bearcats were making it to the Final Four a few years there in a row. I think they were pretty strong around that time, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, they beat the Bearcats to stop a three-peat in overtime. Yeah, so it's a very, very, very good squad. All right. I don't know if anybody cares because they're probably busy filling out their own brackets, or right now they're probably watching the first game. Right now they got Radford up 13-7. So how do you want to handle it, Jim? You just want to go region by region? You want to name your 4? You want me to name my 4? Who's going to make it to San Antonio for the Final Four?
I'll name my 4, and I'll do it very easily because this year has been so chaotic and so many surprises.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to say all 4 number 1 seeds make it to the Final Four.
Oh, so UVA, Xavier,
Villanova,
Nova, and Kansas. Oh, okay. And I don't know.
It's just going to play out. It seems like this one's going to play out, and it's not going to be as chaotic. I don't know. Just going out on a limb.
I think I don't know that that's ever happened since they went to 64, much less 68. I can't see it happen. But I do think what you've been saying for several weeks is that the cream has sort of risen to the top, and I still think we're going to be looking at blue bloods. I don't think we're going to be seeing any surprises, but you just never know. My 4 would be Virginia. I think North Carolina comes out of the West. They just have that pedigree, and you got to remember they are defending champions. A lot of the guys remember that. They've been up and down, but they're strong right now. I think Villanova gets back to the Final Four. They are definitely one of the best teams in there. But I think out of the Midwest, we're going to see that group of very talented players at Duke finally coalesce and make the run that they want to. But it's also probably the easiest quadrant to get out of. They don't really have a lot to get in their way until they get to that Elite Eight game, and who knows who it's going to be. That might be Kansas. Some people are saying Seton Hall, Clemson's in there, Auburn's in that other side, but they just don't have anybody. Michigan State's in their side, but I'm with you. I think they're one of the weakest seeds up there based upon their record. So we got two of them the same, Nova and Virginia. So we'll see what happens in the other two. You've got Kansas and Xavier, and I've got the ACC with North Carolina and Duke. So interesting stuff. And, of course, the nice thing is we'll know by the time we talk about that before we make our final pick, and we can adjust that. All right. What else is on your mind there, Mr. Reaker, before we move on to the trivia and
tidbit? Well, I got one other thing I just came across kind of interest. I found somewhere, I think it was USA Today, ranked all 68 mascots, 1 to 68. And I'll just throw out a couple interesting ones. Number 61, the Bearcats. So they didn't rank very high. Interesting. 51.
You just want to get in the Cincinnati dig on me, don't you?
No. Number 51 is the Lipscomb Bisons, and 50 is the Bucknell Bison. And the editor made the comment that Lipscomb didn't even know that bison is the plural for that animal. So number 16 was the Musketeers. But you wanted to make a guess? You got 68 choices. Who do you think was the number one mascot? And we have mentioned them already tonight in our broadcast. Take a wild guess. You'll never get it.
You mean of the teams in the tournament?
68, yes.
Oh. And we mentioned them? Oh,
we've mentioned them, but we talked about a lot of teams.
Yeah, that's the problem. We've talked about so many. I don't know. The Hilltoppers.
The Radford, close. Radford, you know what their mascot is?
Oh, Hilltoppers didn't make it. That's why I shouldn't be saying that. Yeah. The Radford
Highlanders.
Highlanders, that's who they are. Mm-hmm.
It was actually based on the mascot, the actual mascot. It wasn't the name.
The physical mascot, not the name.
Yes. So if you look up what a Highlander is, it is a pretty cool looking mascot. So you ready for the trivia question?
I better be, because you're about to give it to me.
You might know this, but you might not. Kind of a little hidden tidbit of NCAA tournament. Do you know the only team in the history of the NCAA tournament to turn down a bid?
Oh, that's good. And I do know that, but it's not coming to me because I remember reading about that. No, because it was earlier in the thing when
1970.
Yeah. Marquette.
You are correct.
Yeah,
Marquette with Al McGuire.
Yeah.
And did a little bit of reading. What it was, they had actually invited them and put the bracket out and had placed them in the Midwest bracket at Fort Worth, Texas. And Al felt they should have, because they had a great record that year, ranked 8th in the country, that they should have been sent to the Mid-East site, which was Dayton.
Yeah.
And after that came out, they turned down the bid and accepted the bid to go to the NIT and went on to win the NIT that year. But that's the only time, and actually it can't happen anymore. That case went to court, and you can't do that anymore. So
if you get an
NCAA bid, you got to take it.
You got to take it. And we talked about this at some other time this year or last year when we were talking about Marquette or Al McGuire. You refused that, and then it was shortly after that they said that you couldn't play in both as well.
Yeah, exactly. Because I remember that was the question. What is it? The City College of New York, who's actually the only school to win both of them in the same year.
Yep.
So.
Yep. All right. Good.
What do you got for me?
I didn't get any trivia. I throw out questions to see if you know them, but I don't think there's trivia questions. It's just that
you always
time
have
of year.
an interesting fact of the day. That's
well,
beautiful.
that's why I'm going to give you some tidbits here. We'll go from that.
Tidbits.
First, we'll go to the news. Utah State parts ways with Tim Jerrier after 3 years and a 47-49 record. Long-term assistant there was raised to the head spot, but he's now out, as is Mark Fox at Georgia. After 9 seasons, 166 and 131 doesn't sound so bad, but he couldn't get it done in the SEC. And right now, everybody seems to think that job is Thad Matta's to have should he decide to come back into the coaching ranks. And we knew it wouldn't be long, and they're saying that Thad is healthy. UConn said goodbye to Kevin Ollie, and they fired him for cause after a couple of topics that we mentioned earlier in the year. This is just Coach Ollie's 6th season with the Huskies, the first of which was an NCAA championship. So that's very much a what have you done for me lately? And you would think that Georgia and UConn would be tasty tidbits. UConn maybe not so much. They're not in the Big East anymore. They're in the AAC, but still fantastic traditions there. And Mark Gottfried, who got booted just a little over a year from North Carolina State, and, of course, Kevin Keith did a great job with that program and got them into the dance. He's back into things as the new coach of Cal State Northridge. And a couple other nice little tidbits here. It was on this day in 1954 that Hank Aaron made his debut with the Braves, taking the place of an injured Bobby Thompson. Yes, that Bobby Thompson of the Giants win the pennant fame. A couple other baseball birthdays. It's happy birthday yesterday to Darryl Strawberry, his 56th, and number 55 today to Mariano Duncan, who was part of the 1990 World Champion Reds. And if you're out there filling out your bracket or you think your team's not too well seeded, remember that 3 number 11 seeds have reached the Final Four. It's the lowest of anybody's ever done it. Louisiana State in 1986, George Mason in 2006, and Virginia Commonwealth in 2011. And maybe, I'm sure you know this one, the lowest seed to win it. You talked about it just a couple weeks ago.
Villanova?
That was Villanova in 1985. They were a number 8 seed. So if you're out there, that's good news for Loyola, Chicago, San Diego State, St. Bonaventure, or UCLA, whoever wins. And Arizona State and Syracuse, whoever wins, they'll be the number 11 seeds just to get to San Antonio. And, of course, great news for Kentucky, Missouri, Virginia Tech, or Seton Hall to win it all because it has been done before. We'll be back with you on Thursday for our Razorcast. That's all things Xavier basketball. And by then, everybody will have their 9 TVs tuned to whatever's going on, wherever it is going on. We'll be back with you on Tuesday with our Trogcast. We're getting down toward the end, so only a few left. Anything you want to add there, Jim, before we sign off?
Oh, let the games begin. Oh, I guess they've already begun. So, nope. Let's just start watching and having fun.
That's good. That's all part of it. So we'll see you next Tuesday. Take care until then.